Hi everyone, today we are going to talk about how to use AWS Migration Hub Orchestrator to simplify and accelerate your SQL Server migrations to AWS. My name is Alex, so I'm a product manager for Migration Hub Orchestrator. With me, we have Phil Eakins, who is a senior solution architect. He will show you a detailed demo on Migration Hub Orchestrator. So we have a lot to cover today. So we will start with the challenges customers and migration partners usually kind of like are facing. And then we will talk about how we design and launched AWS Migration Hub Orchestrator to solve those challenges. And then we will deep dive into some of the key features, use cases, and of course, we will highlight the benefits. After that, I will hand it over to Phil. He will show you the demo. And in the last, we will have the call to action, Q&A, and of course, we will have several poll questions. All right, let's get started. What challenges are customers facing today? So for customers who are migrating Windows and SQL Server to AWS, especially for those, for those large scale migrations, if you have like hundreds or even thousands of Windows and SQL servers, you want to migrate, the whole migration process can take over 20 plus months. So this schedule overrun is a big challenge for customers and migration partners. So when we deep dive, it's like, why taking so long for those migration projects? One of the challenges is that for migration projects, you usually involve many different stakeholders, like partners, like customers. Sometimes you're using AWS ProServe for the migration. So different stakeholders will use different migration tools in different migration phases. So the lack of orchestration capability will definitely slow the migration process. The second challenge we observed is that there are many manual tasks during the migration process. For example, you need to install agents, you need to check the versions, the OS, you need to do a lot of the validations to check the environment readiness connections. These kind of like small things. If you're migrating hundreds or many servers, that will take you a lot of time. Also, another challenge is that there is a lack of step-by-step workflows. So you have to kind of like read the long documents or prescriptive guidance, though that will also take a lot of time. So to solve all these challenges, we designed and launched AWS Migration Hub Orchestrator. We call it MHO. So for MHO, our goal is to make this an orchestration engine for migration and modernization projects. Today, we launched it last year, and we support it for several key use cases. And it's a free service, so you can use it at no cost. You only pay for the underlying infrastructure you're using. To highlight several of the key features, the first one is we have predefined workflow templates. So basically for the workflow templates, it includes the step-by-step kind of like workflows. It includes the automation scripts in that, so that you can get started quickly with those workflow templates to simplify and accelerate your migration. We have those streamlined orchestrations. This is because for all the tools you are using, we pass those parameters from one tool to another tool, so that you don't have to manually do that by yourself to save your time. And of course, we have the automation scripts. For example, on-premise, we have a plugin so that you can install that to simplify and automate your on-prem tasks. Also in the AWS part, we have the SSM that also automate the tasks on AWS. So now let's deep dive into some of the key features we support today. So today we support 5 features, or we call it 5 use cases. The first one is rehost Windows and Linux applications on AWS. So you can see that all the tools this MHO can orchestrate. Basically, this is based on application migration service. We call it MGN. This is use cases for you to, for example, if you want to shut down your on-prem data center, you want to migrate everything to AWS, and you don't care. You don't need to take care of one specific applications, one specific database. You want to migrate everything in the server level. This is a simple template. You can use the rehost Windows and Linux applications and rehost that to EC2. Also, we see another use cases like for many customers, if you want to migrate specific SQL Server databases to EC2 or to RDS, you can use another 2 templates we built for you. So for those 2 templates, you can specify which database you want to migrate and to AWS. So also we built another template to support the virtual machine image import. You can use this to convert for example, if you're doing VMware and you want to run the same virtual machine image in EC2, so you can use this template to convert your image to the EC2 ARMY. And of course, we support SAP NetWeaver applications and HANA database to AWS. So quickly go through some of those use cases. So this one, we call it rehost applications on Amazon EC2. This is based on the MGN template. So the benefit here is that we automate the source environment validation. So we will check the connections. We will check whether you have enough space to install the AWS replication agent. This is for your large scale migration. Let's say if you need to migrate hundreds of servers, you don't have to manually install all those replication agents in all of those on-premise servers. You can use MGN to automate the agent installation to save your time. Of course, we support the post-migration automation scripts. This means, so after migration, if you want to use a CloudWatch application inside to monitor your applications, or you want to upgrade to a newer version, let's say it's Windows Server 2012, you want to migrate and also upgrade to a newer version, you can also leverage those post-migration scripts to do that. Also, we support server grouping and waves, meaning you can use ADS, application discovery service, to discover your on-prem environment, and then you can group those servers into applications, and then use MHO to orchestrate those servers or application to AWS. Also, we support the workflow customization. This means if you want to add or remove migration steps per your own purpose, so you can also do that. Also, this template is managed and supported by AWS. If you got any questions or technical issues, you can call our support to get your problem solved. So this is the first use case we support. This is rehost applications to EC2. For Windows migrations, we also see lots of those SQL Server databases And we know that DBAs, they like backup and restore. Many of the use cases, kind of the migration is based on the native backup and restore. The challenge is that it's kind of like a manual process. That's why we use this MHO. We build 2 templates. One is rehost SQL Server to EC2. The other is to replatform SQL Server to RDS. Those two templates will allow you to migrate your SQL Server databases from on-prem to AWS. So it's support a native backup and restore, so that you, and also it allows you to specify which database you want to migrate. It supports full and differential backup, so that you can start with the full backup and also use the differential to save the cutover time. And it supports all the additions like enterprise, standard, web, and even that's all the additions we support today, and also all the versions. Besides those user database, we also support a system database like logins, agent jobs. Also, if you're using TDE for encryption, we can also migrate that. So also, this is a AWS supported and managed templates, and you will get support if you have any issues. This is the 4th use case. We could import virtual machine image to EC2. This is based on a service. We call it EC2 VM import export. This is useful, especially when you during the BYU wall, because you need to use your own image when you run those BYU wall workloads on EC2. So in that case, you need to convert your image to the EC2 format. Then you can use this template for a console-based experience. Of course, the last one, SAP, we know that lots of enterprise customers, they run SAP native web-based applications on the top of SAP HANA database. And we build a kind of like a template specific for the SAP workloads migration. So it's kind of like, it's the same thing, it's in the same console. You go there, you can find out all the kind of like templates in one console, in one place. So when we design this service, we loop in some partners to help us kind of like to collect some early feedback, and also we test the solutions with some of these the two customers. You can see some of their feedback from them. Yeah, this is all right. With that, let me hand it over to Phil for the demo.
Okay, so thanks, Alex, for that. Let me go ahead and hit play. First off, thanks for joining us. This is actually a pre-recorded demo, just because some of the steps take quite a while, so we've kind of used the power of fast forward to make those usable in today's session. So this is the Migration Hub console. Firstly, I want to talk about how do you get your data, your serverless into the system. So this is our collection spot. We have a number of different ways with different connectors and agents, but for today, we're going to focus on a flat file import. You can see here we have some historical information. It's showing the number of imported records for each flat file that I've submitted. It is duplicate aware, so if I submit 20 servers, half of which have already been there, it will ignore the duplicates. So step one is to download our template. That's a CSV file, and we'll bring a copy of it up right now. So you'll see it's just got one record. It's just kind of showing you the template, the format you would need to complete to be able to use this for your data. So that's the template. So for the purpose of this demo, I just have 4 records, an app tier, a couple of database tiers, and a web tier. Single servers, a line per server. For today, I'm just going to be using the data elements I would need for the Migration Hub demonstration. But there are other elements in the spreadsheet for CPUs, memory, utilization that may be appropriate for sizing operations down the road. But today, we're using the external ID, the IP, the host name, and then finally associating it with an application tier, which we'll talk more about in a little bit. So after I've created my flat file, the next thing I need to do is go to an S3 bucket I've prepared and upload that CSV file, because that's how we're going to import it into the console. So let me go ahead and upload the latest version of the CSV that we just saw on the screen. I'll drop that into there and hit upload. Okay, so small file. So that's complete. What I need to do now is copy the S3 URL right there. That's the format we're going to be expecting. So now I can go ahead and provide, a new name for my import and provided the URL that we just copied from the other tab. Okay, and we can go ahead and import. You'll see here it's tagged as importing. It's only going to take a second or two. There's only 4 records. Okay, so we showed that we pulled in 4 records. Obviously, if there'd been duplicates, it would have ignored those. And now that we've imported those, we can go across to our applications tab, and those 4 applications we defined on the far right column are now showing here, and each application tier has a single server associated with it. Application tier, you could treat that as waves. This could be a wave of migration, wave 1 versus wave 2. You could have, one-to-many servers for some of these workflows. So we'll see here, these are the 4 servers that were also in that flat file that we imported. It's brought across the machine names, IP addresses, the applications are associated with. And you'll see on the migration status, some of these are not started, some we're going to be redoing again for the purposes of the demo. So this is kind of your interface to see what's going on with your workflows. Okay, next step, I want to touch briefly on the plugin. This is a plugin that does all the communication between your systems. So first step would be to download the plugin. It is an OVA file, which means that's a VMware image that you would import into your vCenter. So this is the file you would pass across to your VMware admins. It's a Linux appliance. You would put that on your local system, and then that would be the workhorse of handling the communication. We're not going to demonstrate how to do that in VMware. That's kind of out of scope. So I'm going to kind of jump that step and switch across to the appliance that's already staged, and I'm going to SSH into it, and that will be the thing. So these are the instructions that we're going to follow to configure the Migration Hub. And the first thing we need to do is create a batch environment. I'm not a Linux person, but these are the instructions that we'll be following. So this is the server that the appliance that we pre-staged. I'm going to use that first command, the bash docker.exe. For the purposes of the security of this specific environment, I'm going to put a sudo in front of there just to elevate the permissions. But as I follow the instructions that are on the main site for your environment on VMware. So after I created my bash shell, I'm going to go back to the instructions, and now it's telling me to run the plugin setup command. But before I do that, I need to set up my AWS environment. So I'm going to run the AWS configure command. This is going to allow me to pass in some IAM credentials. And so let's go ahead and run that. And we're going to give it a profile name, MHO. And then this is going to ask for the secrets information. First, it's going to ask for the access key. And I'm going to grab that. And the instructions talk about a user to create. So we created the user, we have the credential. I'm going to paste in our access key there. And then we're going to paste in the other secret. Okay, so we've done that. Now we do secret access key. These are all, got out of our IAM user that were created as part of the instructions for this configuration. Okay, these credentials no longer exist. And we're going to do US East 1 because that's where the demo is for today. And we'll take the default for the format. Okay, so we've created our MHO profile. So now we can go back to running the plugin setup command. And let's go ahead and run that. All right. And this is going to run us through, and this is all documented. We'll look at the documentation a little bit. But the first thing it's going to ask us is to read this statement. If you agree with the terms and conditions, please click yes. So I'll agree today. Did we set up the user account per the user guide? Yes, we did. That isn't included in this demo, but that is part of the documentation you'll see. And this is asking for that profile name that we just created, MHO. I'm going to plug that in there. this allows the appliance to be able to talk back to our AWS account. These two questions for the uploading metrics to the orchestrator, these are required for this process to properly function. So it is documented, but you have to say yes to both those choices. And now it's going to start registering the plugin with our AWS account. And now it's saying, for any servers that are not part of vCenter, please provide some Windows credentials. So we are going to do that. And it's looking for a domain/user. So we're going to type in octank/admin. That's your domain/username. And that's going to allow those servers that are not part of the vCenter to be authenticated to from the appliance itself, the plugin. Okay, we'll put in our password. And then after we plug in the password, it's going to ask us about keeping some of the certificates local to the appliance for authentication. We're fine with that, so we're going to hit yes. And we'll hit return. Okay, for the purposes of the demo, we are not going to do a Linux demonstration, so we said no, but it is documented. You'll see here, these are the instructions that we basically walk through. The one thing we did not see pop up was the vCenter, and that's because the appliance I'm running is not actually running on a vCenter today. But you'll see here, this will pop up. It'll ask for the URL to your vCenter, usernames, passwords for different elements of authentication within the VMware environment. So you'll just need to plug these in and work with your administrator to get the right credentials, configure your SSH authentication here. It's pretty straightforward, and then just generate the SSH key for your Linux. So that's the step you didn't see, but this is documented fairly well here. And now it's asking us, do we want to do Windows authentication outside of VMware vCenter? And this is what we just completed with the domain/user. And it's going to ask us the questions. You saw this on the screen, but just showing the documentation is here. And then it asks us about the Linux server, which this is where we said no, but you'll see, similar to how the VMware, it's pretty straightforward here. Then the last piece is some instructions for configuring some scripts on the source machines that are going to be part of this migration. So this is just some instructions around that. Okay, now we've done that, we'll see here that the plugin has appeared in the console, version 1.03, and it showed that it was registered. So that's the plugin we just registered. Okay, so now that we have our data defined, we have our plugin created, let's go to the workflow templates that Alex touched upon already. So we have those 5 templates. The first one is importing the virtual machine, and that's, so you can do that from a VMDK from VMware, or the OVA file from VMware. The second one is the rehosting. Rehosting means doing a complete server migration to AWS at the the bits level. We have our SAP, where we're replatforming to Amazon RDS or rehosting to Amazon EC2. The two workflows we're going to demonstrate today are the rehosting on Amazon EC2 and the rehosting of SQL Server to EC2. So let's go ahead and jump to the workflows, and let's go ahead and create our first workflow. And we're going to select the rehost. This is actually going to use our application migration service behind the scenes, which is a block level replication tool. So let's go ahead and say it's already predefined with 12 steps. We'll look at the steps in a little bit. First, we're just going to give it a name, just because obviously we could have many workflows in existence and running at the same time. So use a naming convention that supports understanding where things are at. So this would be rehost server on EC2. Okay, and then the next step here is picking the application, the wave, whatever you want to term it as, that we're going to move. And for today, we're going to do our application tier. Okay, the next choice, do we want to run some scripts after we've migrated it? We can stage those on an S3 bucket. We're not going to do that today to keep the demonstration simple. What we are going to do is give the service the appropriate rights to install the replication agent. So we're going to go back to those IAM creds. The appliance has the Windows authentication we defined, and that's going to allow us to install the agent on our source machines, the servers that are running on-prem, colo, whatever. That's how we're going to be able to install that agent. Okay, so we have, this is going to be basically a summary of what we just selected. There are not too many choices with the rehost. It is using the application migration service. So we picked our application tier and our authentication method. Okay, so we've created the workflow. Step 1 is to actually run, physically create it, and there it is. So now we have 0 of 11 steps. So let's go ahead and jump in there and look at those. Those 11 steps are predefined by AWS. And you'll see here we have some that are automated, some that are manual. We also have the ability to add manual steps. So what I'm going to do here is, before the process completes, I'm going to add a manual step. And this is going to be a reminder for when we're working through this workload that after I deploy this machine, which is going to deploy as an EC2 to my AWS account, I need to go in and launch our Windows 2012 Systems Manager document to run the upgrade. Today it's just going to be a reminder. I could have uploaded a file or provided an S3 URL to give me a PowerShell script that could actually automate the launching of that SSN doc, but for today, it's just going to be a tickler file to remind me to do that manually. And you'll see it's defined as manual, managed by the customer. Okay, so now we have 12 steps as we've added one more. So this is currently editable, but as soon as you hit the run command, it becomes a static workflow. We don't want to create unknown scenarios. So once you hit run, it's a static workflow until it completes. So we've started the workflow. Let's go ahead and hit refresh. Say the first part here is let's go ahead and expand all those steps. And now you see it's running our validation. It's going on saying, can I see the source server? Can I talk to it? Can I authenticate properly? So let's go ahead. So it's going to do that for a while. Let's hit refresh and we'll wait. So the next step it's going to do is to actually install the agent. So let's go look at our application migration service console to see how that looks. We do have a server there that's showing up at the bottom, that's source-SQL. So you can see here it's got 19% synchronized, 76 minutes to go. It's doing a block level replication of all the drives attached to that instance. So that's why it takes a while to complete that initial synchronization. Then obviously then it switches to block level to keep it in sync. Whilst that's running, let's talk. This isn't a demonstration of the application migration service, but some of the elements that you should be aware of in the context of using this with the Migration Hub. We want to define the server size. Obviously, the more robust the replication server, the faster the storage, the better performance you will see in that replication effort. On the launch template, here we're going to define when we launch those EC2 machines, which VPC, what networking, what instance type we want to use, the specific subnet we're going to point it at, the storage tier we want the EC2 to be attached at, any security groups, and also from a licensing, do we want to license this as license included or bring your own license? And do we want to start the instance upon launch? So those are just configurations that we set here, and then any launches that occur will honor these settings. We also have the option in the post-launch do we want to activate a post-launch? Obviously, we have that manual step, so we're not going to do that right here. Okay, so we've looked at that. So let's go ahead and refresh, and now we've jumped ahead in time, and it's reporting that it's healthy and the replication initial sync is completed. And it's ready for testing. Okay, so let's go back to the Migration Hub. That first workflow is moving forward, and now you'll see we're on step 3 of 12, and it's saying user attention required. What that means is we have actually reached one of the manual steps that is being defined by AWS. And this is saying we're ready for you to bring in your QA team, your smoke testers. We have a machine, it's not cut over yet. You can launch a test copy just to make sure that the application is working properly, the website, whatever. So once we've had a team in there, say, okay, this is completed. Now we can go ahead and launch that machine for our team to come in and do their, the smoke testing like we talked about. And this is gonna, launch that test machine and say, we're not cut over yet. We're still in the testing phase. And then we'll, refresh this a couple of times. And then once we're done, now we see we've moved to step 6. And again, user attention required. This is another manual step. And this is basically saying, we're ready to do a cutover. My smoke testing is complete. Everything looked good. So actions, change status completed or failed if you were not happy with it. But this is going to move the process forward. So we'll look at the steps now and say we've moved past. And now it's going to go into application migration service. And now it's actually going to launch the machine. So you'll see here it's tagged as launched. The cutover is complete. So now we can go back to the Migration Hub. And now we're moved to step 11, 10 is complete. And this is the manual step that I added. This is where I would go in, and launch my Systems Manager document to run an automated Windows 2012 R2 migration. Okay, so we'll go do that. We'll mark that step complete. And then the last step here is everything looks good. And then we just need to archive it. So if we hit refresh one more time, you'll see we'll move to 12 of 12. And this workflow is completed. So that machine has been completely copied across to our AWS account at the block level. So a complete copy of what we had on-prem. And if we go look at application migration service, that server is gone now because it's being launched. But if we look at our launch history here, we'll see that we can go check out the machine that was launched, the information about it. If we view it in the EC2 console, we'll see that it's there. It's not currently running because that's the choice we made within the application migration service choice configuration we looked at before. But here we have the instance, and here's where we can do any additional steps you want to do here. This is a final cutover. Okay, so that is the first demonstration complete. Let's move to the second demonstration where we're going to create a workflow for rehosting SQL Server databases on Amazon EC2. Now it's a rehost, but it's a migration workflow. This is not going to provision a brand new SQL Server. It is not going to install SQL Server. It assumes that SQL Server has been installed on EC2 on your account, pre-configured, and that's all done. And we're at the point where we're going to do, backing up databases and users and moving them across. So this is not, we have the launch wizard tool that can handle all those configurations for you. This process is assuming that's all complete. So let's go ahead and give it a unique name. And this time we've got a few more choices because there's a number of more elements going on here. So this time we're going to pick our EC2 SQL Server as our tier that we want to migrate across. And we have the choice here to bring across our TDE certificates. We're not going to do that today, but it is supported. And here I'm going to specify the databases. It could be all the databases on my instance, or it could be a subset. And we can bring multiple instances together in a single target instance. So here I'm going to specify the source-SQL. That's what we defined in our CSV that we first brought across. That's how we identify the server. And we need to identify the profile, which is going to be that MHO that we defined as part of the initial configuration of the plugin. And here we need the source name. This is actually the OS name. It's what you'd plug into Systems SQL Server Management Studio to connect. And if this is a named instance, you'd obviously have to do a /instance name at the end there. But that's what that's looking for, the machine name you would connect to through Management Studio. And then we also need to give it a directory that lives on the source machine. This is going to be where we're going to take those full backups, those differentials, and stage them before we push those across to S3. So that's the backup location. And that directory does have to exist. If it doesn't exist, it will fail the validation step. On the target side, we're going to define that we want to bring across our logins, our agent jobs, and we also want to do a differential, meaning we're going to have one of those manual steps that's going to stop the process and then allow us to put up our Gone Fishing page and then switch out to a final differential and restore. Let's say we have to pass it the EC2 instance that we've already built. That's a prerequisite that your SQL Server target already exists. So that's the instance ID that ties back to that EC2 machine name. And then we also need to define credentials. And these need to be SQL Server credentials. So not Windows credentials. These are going to be SQL authentication credentials that are in Secrets Manager. And this is all in the documentation. And here again, instance name is the machine name you would use to connect through Management Studio. And another directory on the target machine. This is where we're going to pull those files from S3 back down to the target before we do the restore command. And the last data point we need to provide here is a path for the data files and the log files. I'm using the default. It could be a dedicated log drive, a dedicated data drive, but that's where we're going to, when the restore commands, that's where those MDFs, LDFs, and such are all going to be brought and restored to. Okay, so let's review. We have our target environment, we have our source environment, we have the application that we're going to focus on, and then we have our workflow details. So we can go ahead and hit next. And this is just a review step. We can also find these details in the workflow details after we click create. And again, it's creating right now. It's still editable. We could add some additional manual steps, such as some specific T-SQL that's required for some kind of data cleanup as part of the cutover. But we're going to keep it as vanilla today. We have 17 steps that are defined by AWS, and those are what we're going to leave it as today. So 4 sets of tasks here. We have our validation. This is similar to the one we saw before, but obviously here, along with talking to the OS, it's got to talk to SQL Server, make sure that the credentials are correct, that the directories exist, the additions and versions are all correct. And then here we have the last step, which is the cutover. So we have 4 different steps here. So let's go ahead and hit run. And we'll look at these steps in more detail as we move through. So let's go back to page 1 here. Okay, so it's created the workflow. And let's refresh this and expand the workflow. Let's go back to page 1 here. Okay, so here are the 4 steps. The validation, it's going to create the first workflow, the first full backups, this time with no recovery because we selected that differential choice. It's also going to do and then it's going to do a restore of the full backup, and then it's going to do the final cutover. So let's jump to SQL Server here. Here you'll see we have the environment. There are currently no databases, no logins, and no jobs. That's because we're still in the validation stage. We don't have a, so we haven't done any restores yet. We're just validating the environment. So we can refresh here, and no databases, no logins brought across yet. And the logins and agents are at the instance level. We'll bring across everything, but you can specify individual databases to bring across. So let's go ahead and hit refresh. You'll see now we're on step 11. So we've already gone through our validation step. We decided to not do a certificate because that we did not select TDE, but we have validated our source and target. We've done the initial backup, the full backup and restore with no recovery. We've backed up our agent jobs and our logins. And then we've done the initial restore. Again, this is a restore with no recovery because we did select to have a differential be the final cutover point. And then we're going to do the restore with no recovery. Okay, so we've got to this point, and now it's waiting on demand. So let's go ahead and hit refresh again. So now we can look at SQL Server, and now we've done the first piece. We have not done a final cutover, but we have done our first restore with no recovery. So if we hit refresh now, we'll see those 5 databases are there in a restoring mode, meaning it's waiting for the last differential to be applied. And we have brought across 5 test users, and a couple of agent jobs have also been brought across from the source machine. Okay, so we have the users, we have the databases at a partially restored state. So we go back to the workflow now and refresh. You'll see here we're at a user attention required. This is the point where we can say, okay, we've got our first full copy. Now we are at the point where we want to put up our going fishing page. We want to tell the users the migration is occurring, that they should exit the system, and mark the source environment read-only, or whatever your change management project is to handle cutovers. So users are out, data is static. Now we want to mark this step as complete, and then we can go ahead and take our differential to handle those last few transactions since we did the full. So let's go ahead and change status, marks completed, and refresh. And now it's going to move forward to the next step. Let's go ahead and close that out, expand. And we'll see now that we are on step 4C, that is performing a differential backup and then restoring the differential backup. And if we hit refresh again, so now it's going through and doing all the differentials and the restore with the recovery. And let's go back to SQL Server and let's refresh this one more time. Okay, so now we're at user attention required. That means that basically it has done the differential restores with recovery. It validated that the databases are online. And effectively the workflow is complete. We just need to go into the last step and say, okay, everything looks good. Let's go ahead and mark, go in here and say, mark this specific task as the workflow is complete. This migration is complete. So we can change status to completed. Then hit refresh and we'll see, okay, 17 of 17. This workflow is complete. So let's go back to SQL Server now and check that the changes have occurred. So if we refresh the databases, those 5 databases now are in a full read-write state because they've already been recovered with recovery. The users and logins, we already brought those across in the first step, so they weren't refreshed as part of this final step. They were brought over in the first step. And that is the demo. There are a couple of assumptions here that we have the appropriate networking between your on-prem or colo location and your AWS account so that the appliance can talk to things. But that is the demo. And then the next step here would be to change back to the deck and pass it back to Alex. Thank you.
Right, so for the call to action, we put the service links there. So feel free to try the AWS Migration Hub Orchestrator. Just want to highlight again, this is a free service. You don't need to pay for the service. You only pay for the underlying infrastructure you're using. Also, we have the user guide. So you can, refer to the user guide for the detailed how to use the service, how to use the templates we provide. So if you have any questions, feel free to send an email. You can reach out to us using the, the email we listed here.